Welcome to One Word Stories, episode 31. And my name is Joanna Zell. I'm really happy to host a very special interculturalist and a very special friend of mine, Grazia GHELLINI. Grazia is the professor of intercultural communication and leadership and also a global business professor at the Learning Abroad Center at the University of Minnesota, as well as business ethics professor at the Montpellier Business School. And she also has a teaching assignment at the MoMA in Montpellier at the moment. And of course, is on her way with many intercultural as well as gamification programs around the world, so to say, due to the virtual context. Grazia, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I'm really honored to be your guest today.
Yes, and I'm happy that we have made it because actually we have made it also despite pandemics to see each other in person, which was fantastic. What is most important for our One Word Stories series is that we share a common passion. We share a passion for traveling. We share a passion for good food. We have had also the chance to share despite the pandemics face to face, and we share a huge passion for storytelling. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you how your adventure with storytelling started and what brought you to the theme.
Okay, so first of all, I really enjoyed immensely listening to stories as a child. I certainly tired my poor mom out. I was always asking her to tell me the same stories over and over. But then later, when I was at university and I did my PhD, I wrote a PhD thesis on a writer of fiction, but also a cultural historian called Marina Warner, who has written several studies on fairy tales and who has also rewritten fairy tales and myths in her writings of fiction. Um, and a work that she wrote titled From the Beast to the Blonde particularly inspired me because in this work, she pointed out the immense power of fairy tales, uh, the immense power that they have on us, both on tellers and as listeners. Yes. So when we tell a story, first of all, we are the tellers, but we are also the protagonist. And thirdly, we also remember the immense pleasure we had when we were listeners. And so we also become listeners of our own stories. Yes. And she points out the transformative effect that stories have on us. Um, Therefore, I bore this in mind when I started working both as an interculturalist and as a trainer in general. I tried to exploit this transformative power of telling stories. This is what got me started using stories.
Yes, very interesting. So actually the adventure started with retelling the fairy tales. When I think of, this talent of retelling, I immediately have to think also of one more very powerful, inspiring writer, female writer, Rebecca Solnit, who also has rewritten the Cinderella, where she at the very end says it's not about that they lived happily ever after, but that they sat together, the prince and Cinderella, and started to talk how they actually imagine to spend the future together. So this is also something that is currently a big theme, not only when we work with our clients in the intercultural field with their personal stories, but also these big narratives. Yeah, so also this what we also say that are the culturally driven stories and this world of obviousness that is created and co-created by people who belong to different cultures. And this brings me to the question, how do you, Grazia, actually work in the context of business ethics with stories? Because this is also very, very interesting.
Yes, well, we can say that telling stories can help us make ethical connections. Yes, there is a specific technique also that I have learned from Tayagi, which is called creative storytelling, that we can use in a very powerful way to make students aware of their ethnocentrism, for instance. I learned from Tayagi this. Activity which consists in students making listen to a passage from a story called Sentry, um, that the students have to continue at some point. And by telling the story as we imagine it, and then by listening to the original story, we understand how terribly ethnocentric and potentially racist we can be in fact, right? So I think that getting students to use creative storytelling or storytelling in general, we can make things happen. We can make people change their behavior. Another activity that I often use that is linked to storytelling is an activity which consists in getting students to reflect on their name story. It is an activity that I have partly learned from George Simons, our colleague and friend.
Mhm.
Um, and while telling the story of their names, students can think about not only where is it that the names came from, who gave them their names, but also the values that are behind their names. Yeah, and I make my students think about whether they have actually adopted such values or whether they have rejected them throughout the course of their lives. And this is very important because when one studies business ethics, it is very, very important to be aware of one's values and where is it that they come from. Do they come from our national culture, from our family culture, from our religious heritage, or from our just the values that we wanted to make ours because of our personality? But in order to actually study business ethics, I think it's very, very important to become aware of this. And stories, telling stories can be a very helpful tool in doing so.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Yes, you also refer to two very creative men who have definitely impacted the intercultural field, but also work with stories in a very, very impressive way. And actually, both Tiagi and George Simons have already joined the One Word Stories series and also have shared how they work with stories in this interactive way. And this is what I hear from you right now as well, that what is really important is to not only give the people the chance to listen to or to read these inspirational stories, but really to co-create, yeah, and to exchange their observations and also go beyond, so to say. So really use the storytelling activities and practices as a springboard to talk about the values. How do the people react?
How do people react to co-creating stories?
Yes.
Well, I think this is a very personal reaction, of course. I don't think we can generalize, yes. But usually when people co-create stories, they create incredible links that go well beyond, in fact, the classroom or the training room. And we could say magical things happen. Yes, intercultural connections start forming. So I think that's just co-creating a story, co-telling a story is an incredible intercultural tool.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. When you referred also to this exercise with the names, I also have to think about one activity that brought a group together actually. And in this activity, I asked the people to work with the objects. And one of them, coming originally from Gabon, introduced the idea of the kota mask. So the kota mask, where the mask is really yes, can be written from the outside world, so to say, because different kinds of decorations, partly tattoos, are added to this mask in course of the life. So it reveals also how a person enters different chapters. Nevertheless, the inside part of the mask shows just this huge changes to the person who goes through them. And when the PhD student shared this idea with his mates in the group, they got very, very triggered. So actually what happened was that the entire lunch break we spent talking about the tribal cultures in Gabon, about the different celebrations and rituals and so on and so forth. And it brings me to one more idea. Can you also share such a moment when you introduce such a practice, such an activity?
I can give an example of how I used objects in a similar way as prompts, yeah, realia, we could say. I often use this activity where I get students to or trainees to choose an object that is really, really important to them, that they either always bring with them or that has particular meaning, as I said, to them. And then I tell them to tell a story from this object's point of view. What would this object tell about you, about who you are? Yeah. And that's how, in fact, students, in the case of business ethics, for instance, can reflect on their once more on their values. What is it that really matters to them? What is it that makes them make decisions, and which means also ethical decisions when it comes to that? Yes. To give an example of the kind of object that I bring along with me, a Durma doll, yes, which actually leads to what is important to me. So Dermadol, I don't know if you know what it is. It is a
No,
kind
no,
of
I don't.
red doll, yeah,
Mhm.
that is a luck, we could say luck charm, so to say. When people have projects in Japan, people
Ah,
usually draw the first eye on this doll. It is a doll with blank eyes. So people draw the first eye on this doll when they start the project, and then they draw the second eye when the project has become realized, it has been accomplished. Yeah. And this is an object that I really like having on me, yeah, because it makes me think of the projects that I have, and helps me be perseverant.
you have also mentioned that what inspired you mostly was your PhD theme, and also actually your adventure started with the fairy tales. Do you actually work with fairy tales in the intercultural context?
Yes, sometimes I do. For instance, I get students to think about the fairy tales that are popular in their culture. Yes, and what are the values that are handed over to them by such a culture? We do that at CIEE. So we get students to compare the mainstream American fairy tales with mainstream French fairy tales, and
Hmm.
see how such tales actually hand over values of independence or the contrary when children are little. Yes, and so this is just an example. We can find many examples of how we inherit values from fairy tales and also ancient myths that propose models of citizenship, of womanhood, of nationhood, and so on. And what is interesting is that, as Marina Warner pointed out, we don't have to be passive receptacles of such values. We can actually appropriate such values by retelling the tales, by writing or telling new stories and filling them out with new meanings that we want to hand over to posterity or to the people we speak with, we interact with. That is how we can use fairy tales with women we want to try and empower, migrant women.
Yeah, we have just mentioned, also how the Cinderella has been rewritten. Is there any fairy tale, maybe also by Charles Perrault from France, who or that needs to be rewritten? How would you like to re-narrate it?
Yes, well, I don't know if I really have a specific story that I would like to retell. Maybe probably would have chosen the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale once more, because women have to wait the for the beautiful, charming prince to come along, for their lives um, to actually happen. Yes, for them to be able to have a nice future. Whereas instead, of course, women should be able to do that independently from men. Not because I'm not a romantic person. I think it's wonderful to have a partner, but I think that the model of femininity that is handed over to young girls by this kind of stories can be quite damaging. A woman has to learn how to be independent, at least according to me, from early on, rather than actually think that she will depend entirely on a man to be able to stand on her own feet.
Exactly, and much more proactive and also much more in charge of their own story, so to say, to be the author of the story and not the observer. Yeah. Definitely, yes. Thank you for this Sleeping Beauty narration, because this is also how I feel about women's empowerment. The more stories of empowerment we share, the more impact we can have. Yeah, especially when you say that you are working also with stories in the migrant and also refugee context. It can be really an eye opener. Yeah, so just to have a second look at this narratives that have formed our perception of the world, so to say. And it brings me also to one more actually issue, because Grazia, you have such a vast experience also in working with migrants from different corners of the world. Just recently, we had this amazing discussion that there are situations when people are not ready or are not really feeling like sharing their personal story, and that it's not the sign of missing trust. It's just a sign of the misfit of the situation, location, and yes, just bringing this traumatic story to the surface. How can we handle it when we see that people are hesitant to share stories also during this intercultural programs or also intercultural coachings?
Yes, well, this is not always very easy to do, but that is why I use, in fact, prompts taken from art, yes, from literature and art, yes, because sometimes there can be really powerful doors that, in fact, open the way to storytelling and to helping individuals to liberate themselves or from really hard stories or share their hard stories with others and therefore reappropriate them and feel more in control of their lives. Yeah. So, for instance, I use sometimes street art pictures. Yes, for instance, I have taken a really beautiful series of street art photographs when I was in Brazil. And in one of them, for instance, there is an individual who he's uh, kind of I don't know how to explain it, but crouching down in a almost like hiding or crying, and reflecting probably on his identity. This is what you might guess, yes, or perhaps reflecting on his drama, whatever happened to him or her. We cannot see his face. We cannot see the skin color nor the face, yeah. And we know, for instance, that in Brazil, a lot of people don't even know their origins because the Portuguese burnt the archives before fleeing when slavery was ended. Yes, so the drama of the most Black people there is that they don't even know where they come from. Yes, and this is something very, very, very hard for them to handle. Yes, so this kind of artwork can really help people share a lot of different stories. Yes, so it can be about identity, about their origins, about a drama, about something that happens to them. So I usually show them the picture and ask them, if, first of all, to guess where it was from and who is the person, and can they please now tell the story that is inside the character's head. So this can be really, really extremely powerful, as I said. I also tell people that they can write the story and then read it or just tell it. They can also tell a story with their bodies if they wish, instead of with their voice, or they can even draw their story if they prefer. Some people, especially newcomers, don't really have the correct vocabulary to express themselves, so art can be a very good way of telling a story in an alternative way, in a different way. Then other ways in which I get people who might be reluctant to actually tell their stories, share their stories, to do so is by using excerpts from graphic novels by writers of refugee origins or writers that are from other countries. Yes, so I'll give you an example. There's a beautiful, beautiful, actually there are a couple of really beautiful graphic novels written by Zina Abirashed, who wrote a really beautiful and beautifully illustrated graphic novel titled Refuge, and also another one titled Le Piano Oriental, the Oriental Piano. And when I just use these images from some images from this graphic novel, and once more get the participants to tell the stories or story behind them, then quite a lot can happen. Yeah, wonderful, incredible stories, not really wonderful, but incredible stories, or in fact, very sad stories sometimes are told and shared. I sometimes also use excerpts from another graphic novel, another series of graphic novels titled Couleur, Couleur de peau miel de Jung, who is a Belgian writer, but of Korean origin, who was adopted by a family in Belgium. In this series of graphic novels, very powerful ones, the theme of origins, roots, lost roots comes up regularly. And it's really powerfully illustrated. So this series of graphic novels can offer plenty of graphic material, illustrated material, in fact, for people to reflect on their origins, whether they are newcomers or even third culture kids. Yeah, because very often third culture kids also ask themselves questions about who they are, where is it that they come from, and so on, and they don't quite know how to position themselves.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much also for these inspirations. And just recently, really this month actually, a good friend of mine, Nicola, also showed me an amazing graphic novel, Habibi. And when you right now say that you work with these materials, it also inspires me that it's also a great idea to try out different visuals, not only The one, let's say, that are known from the museums and also from the street art, but also the graphic novels. Fantastic idea. Thank you very, very much. And thank you for
And
all your inspirations, Grazia. You have shared generously so much, so many ideas how to work with stories in different contexts, and also how to use prompts, which is really very, very empowering, because yes, we know that this is the moment where people kind of externalize the story, that they really feel invited to start with something pretty abstract and then dive into their own story. And as they are in this creative mood, yeah, so to say, they are really more eager and just ready to tell their own story.
yes, and in my case, since I often work with people from other from different cultural backgrounds, sorry, and people sometimes who don't speak the same language, I also let them tell the story in their own language, and then I let some of the participants translate for them when they share their stories. So that is very important, because sometimes when we tell our story, we need to tell it in our language. It is very important to be close to one's roots. And it is important to let the storyteller to be able to tell it in his own language.
And as for different languages, what is actually the word that is meaningful to you during this pandemic times, and what is actually the story behind?
Yes, I would say really perseverance, perseverance in relation to projects. Having projects is really what helped me hang out in there. It was very, very difficult because everything shifted, everything changed, and I needed something to motivate me to keep on teaching, for instance. What I enjoy about my job, training and teaching, is human contact. And at the beginning, for some reason, I couldn't really see how we could establish real human contact with my trainees and students and even friends just via a computer. Then later I changed my mind because I looked more into it, and I learned how to use such tools, to use Zoom and other tools to teach online in a more effective way, on how to in fact, teach even in an interactive way. During the pandemic, somebody made me join a group which was doing a um, meditation app, we could call it like that, called 21 Days of Abundance. Yes.
Mhm.
And even though at the beginning I was almost sneering at the person who had proposed it to me, I have to say that I hugely benefited from it. Yes. It really helped me, yeah, stay focused, to be at peace with myself and with what was happening at the time, yeah, during the pandemic.
Mm, mm.
That
Yeah.
really helped me be perseverant too, because at sometimes I was feeling like, well, why make an effort? It was really not always very easy.
Yeah. Yeah. When you also work with stories, have you had the opportunity to also invite stories of perseverance to the intercultural programs? Have you heard other stories how people dealt with the situation?
Yes, I guess during trainings, it's of course it's something that always comes up. One of the fields I'm working in is personal leadership and intercultural communication. And personal leadership is something that really can help us, in fact, self-awareness, and to learn the kind of impact that feelings have on us, and how we can become masters of ourselves if we learn how to know ourselves. Right. So I would say this then can help us be more perseverant uh,
Mm,
and achieve our objectives in times of difficulties like coronavirus times.
yeah. Yeah, I still remember also talking to a client who was the intercultural coaching client, and he also shared that actually the breathing techniques he used to apply even as a teenager or a young student can be very, very powerful and helpful in the common situation when I ask him what might be supportive in his case. So I'm really grateful when you emphasize the personal leadership, because this is exactly the point, that there are no golden recipes. Yeah, sometimes we can get a piece of advice from someone, oh, try out this and that, and it's always worth trying. Nevertheless, everybody has to find her his own way how to actually deal with fostering the perseverance and yes, building this resilience in these tough times. Grazie mille. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I hope I have covered right now the languages of the places where you have lived and gathered your experience with storytelling, because Grazia, you have had the opportunity to really listen to many, many stories and also share your own stories in Italy, in Emilia Romagna above all, and also in Great Britain and currently in France. I wish you lots of fantastic projects, storytelling projects, lots of energy and perseverance for the upcoming busy time, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much. I'm really very happy to have been your guest.
Thank you for joining.